Hello and welcome to Newsweek South Asia, your one-stop destination for in-depth analysis of security challenges, regional conflicts and the evolving threat of terrorism. Let's take a look at the headlines first. Pakistan's UN gamble backfires. India exposes terror narrative. Ceasefire brings temporary calm but fears linger on Pak-Afghan border. And children killed, villages destroyed in Balochistan amid military siege. This week at the United Nations, Pakistan faced a humiliating diplomatic blowback after attempting to legitimize cross-border terrorism as a so-called freedom struggle. India delivered a sharp and uncompromising rebuttal, exposing Islamabad's decade-long tactic of using terror as a state policy while preaching victimhood on global platforms. On Newsweek South Asia, we break down how Pakistan's narrative collapsed at the UN, why its doublespeak has lost credibility, and how India is reshaping the global counter-terrorism discourse with facts, clarity and intent.
I reiterate that the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir was, is and will always remain an integral part of India. And the only unresolved issue is the vacation by Pakistan of illegally occupied parts of Indian territory of Jammu and Kashmir.
At the United Nations, India delivered a stinging rebuttal as Islamabad tried to whitewash its decades-long terror enterprise by masquerading jihadi proxies as so-called freedom fighters. The confrontation unfolded during an interactive dialogue with the UN Special Rapporteur on Fundamental Freedoms in Counter-Terrorism. Pakistan's representative, Mohammad Javad Ajmal, urged the UN to distinguish terrorism from freedom struggles, essentially demanding legitimacy for Pakistan-sponsored terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. But that narrative collapsed instantly. India's first secretary to the UN mission, Raghu Puri, delivered a direct, hard-hitting expose, tearing apart Pakistan's excuses and labeling it the epicenter of global terrorism.
Terrorism is among the gravest offenses that fundamentally violates the core of humanity. It represents the worst of bigotry, violence, intolerance, and fear. Terrorists are the worst of the worst in humankind, and my country has borne the brunt of this devastation caused to lives, families, and societies as a result of cross-border terrorism that has been afflicted upon us for decades now. Terrorism, in fact, represents the biggest threat to the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and it is important that we condemn it in all forms and manifestations. It's a shared threat that can be addressed only through deeper international cooperation. Chair, my delegation condemns yet another futile attempt by a member state to misuse this platform to propagate misinformation and disinformation. The international community stands witness to Pakistan's sponsorship of cross-border terrorism and its use of terrorism as a tool of state policy directed against India.
Pakistan attempted to twist international law by falsely claiming that UN endorses violent movements as freedom struggles. But the record is clear. UN resolutions from 1991 to 1994 to 2004 categorically state that no political or ideological motive can justify acts of terror. Yet Pakistan continues to shelter Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hizbul Mujahideen, terrorist groups responsible for massacres from Mumbai to Kashmir. For years, Islamabad has tried to block the global counter-terror framework, only to protect its favorite proxies. When exposed on terrorism, Islamabad played its next card, human rights. Pakistan accused India of violating the rights of those attacking the country. But New Delhi hit back, reminding the UN that the worst human rights violator in South Asia is not India, it is Pakistan itself. From the genocide in 1971 to the persecution of Hindus, Christians and Ahmadis to the slaughter of Pashtuns and Baloch civilians, Pakistan's record is drenched in blood, not credibility.
This country has normalized dehumanizing its ethnic and religious minorities, its genocide of its own civilians in 71 in erstwhile East Pakistan, its interference in Afghanistan, leading to displacement and killing of people, and its use of terrorism as state policy exposes its duplicity and futile attempts to take cover of Islamophobia to hide its atrocities. Pakistan's decade-old institutionalized persecution of Hindu, Christian, and Ahmadiyya minority communities with impunity in the name of religion continues unabated and is yet another example of its double standards.
The UN debate also came days after India demonstrated decisive action against Pakistan-based terror infrastructure. Operation Sindoor, launched after the Pahalgam massacre that killed 26 civilians in Jammu and Kashmir, neutralized 9 major terror bases in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. These camps served as training hubs for LET, JEM and Hizbul, the very outfits Pakistan calls freedom fighters. India's response was measured, legitimate and non-escalatory, a stark contrast to Pakistan, which retaliated by deliberately shelling civilian areas across the border.
The brutal targeted attacks carried out by Pakistani trade terrorists, which claimed the lives of 26 innocent civilians in Pahalgam on 22nd April 2025, have not been forgotten by the world. India's legitimate right to defend itself was measured and non-escalatory in order to protect our people against terrorism and bring the organizers and perpetrators to justice, as was articulated in the UN Security Council's press statement that was released condemning this very attack. In contrast, Pakistan deliberately targeted our borders, villages, resulting in civilian deaths, including that of children. Pakistan must look itself in the mirror, stop preaching sermons at this forum, and act to protect children within its own borders and stop targeting women and children across the borders.
From Geneva to POJK, Pakistan's pattern is now unmistakable. Create terrorists, deny responsibility, play the victim, and then cry Islamophobia when caught. But India's message at the UN was unambiguous. The world can no longer allow Pakistan to hide behind propaganda, religion, or falsified narratives.
Pakistan's decade-old institutionalized persecution of Hindu, Christian, and Ahmadiyya minority communities with impunity in the name of religion continues unabated and is yet another example of its double standards.
South Asia is once again staring at a dangerous rupture along one of the world's most fragile borders. After more than a week of deadly skirmishes across the Durand Line, Pakistan and Afghanistan have agreed to a fresh ceasefire. But behind the optics of peace talks lies a much older story of mistrust, proxy terror, and blowback Pakistan can no longer control. Islamabad's decade-long gamble of sponsoring terrorism in Afghanistan has turned inward, and the fire it once fueled has reached its doorstep. We have a detailed report.
Pakistan and Afghanistan have announced a new ceasefire after days of intense cross-border clashes that left scores dead and entire Afghan communities devastated. The agreement brokered through talks in Doha promises an end to hostile actions and commits both sides to halt strikes on each other's territory. The latest border clashes erupted after explosions in Kabul were followed by fierce exchanges along multiple frontier posts. The Taliban accused Pakistan of carrying out cross-border strikes, while Islamabad claimed it was targeting TTP safe havens on Afghan soil. What followed was one of the most violent escalations since the Taliban's return to power in 2021. Artillery duels, drone strikes and ground assaults pounded civilian areas, leaving Afghan towns shattered and dozens dead, including women and children. Even after an initial truce, airstrikes and retaliatory fire continued, defying diplomatic appeals and escalating public anger on both sides of the border.
شپې ز خپل د ساحه کې موجودم دغه مې وتاک ته دلته ومه چې شپې و نیمې بجې خپله خبرو ته ناست وم، خبرونه مې کتل چې درې شو مېمنخانه وشته. موږ سره مېمنخانه کې مېلمانه ول، د کرکټ لوبغاړي ول، میچ یې ګټلی و. راغلي و دلته بیا پروګرام د ډوډۍ ورته نیولی و. نو دغه چې د درې شو اوله چپه کې زخمیان شهیدان دغلته پراته ول.
Entire communities have been caught in the crossfire, and Afghanistan says the dead were overwhelmingly civilians.
کې بیا په دریم پټاو باندې زه خپله زخمي وم، وینې رانه تلې، لاس مې دلته مې لاس لګېدلی ده. دا وینې موږ ملکي خلک یو، موږ نظامینو دلته لګېدلی یم. بیا زه په دریم پټاو کې زه هسپتال کې چې دریم پټاو وکړو، زما خو سر زما یو وړوکی اخ شی دغه شهیدان شوي دي. تقریبا 12-13 کسان شهیدان دي، 12 کسان زما په شمول زخمیان دي چې هغه ملکي خلک دلته موږ ته مرستې ته موږ خپله دلته حالات بیخي خراب ول.
For families living along the Durand line, this conflict is neither new nor accidental. They have paid the price of a border drawn by colonial powers, claimed by Pakistan and rejected by Afghans for generations. At the heart of the hostility lies a historic wound, the Durand line. A colonial era boundary enforced by Pakistan, never recognized by any Afghan government and resented by Pashtun communities divided on both sides. For decades, Islamabad tried to control Afghanistan not through diplomacy but through proxies, from the Mujahideen era to the Taliban's first and second rise. But the power equation has now flipped. The Taliban in Kabul no longer take dictation from Rawalpindi. They see Pakistan not as a patron but as a rival trying to impose a border they reject. Islamabad now accuses the Afghan Taliban of sheltering the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, the very militants who once benefited from Pakistan's own strategic games. The irony is impossible to ignore. Islamabad nurtured Taliban militancy for strategic depth. Today, the same ecosystem fuels an insurgency against the Pakistani state itself.
This was very clearly, spelled out that there won't be any incursions and TTP will not have any facility on their soil. We kept on repeating, and obviously they deny it, but in an implied way, both the countries, Turkey and Doha, Qatar, they pressed upon them that this is the main bone of contention, that your territory or your patronage or your support is there for TTP to operate in Pakistan. So we told them that this is something which everything hinges on this one clause.
Yet Kabul denies the charge, and the battlefield tells a different story. One where the old allies are now open adversaries. The violence is no longer a local feud. With CPEC routes, migration corridors, and extremist networks spread across the frontier, instability here threatens the entire South Asian security architecture.
دا برید خو دلته د پاکستان د طرفه څه وشو، دا زموږ کور چې دی دا موږ عوام خلک یو، دلته نه نظامي اډه وه نه څه نظامي خلک دلته ول، ښځې و کوچنیان و ماشومان و په کور کې چې مین وموښتئ. تقریبا 14 کسان موږ زخمیان لرو، د شهیدانو سره 15 کسان شهیدان لرو.
Behind each ceasefire announcement lies a border that can ignite again within hours. Regional security experts warn this truce may only be a pause, not peace.
Will there be an outbreak again? Inevitably, there will be. And since the TTP are unlikely to give up on their efforts here to destabilize Pakistan, inevitably there will be further times when there is exchange. But both sides, I hope, have learned from this how quickly it is to lose control of the situation.
Three outcomes now stare South Asia in the face. 1. An unstable ceasefire that collapses with the next TTP attack. 2. A prolonged border Cold War with periodic artillery clashes and rising militancy. Or 3. Pakistan is forced to confront a reality it has avoided for decades, that state-sponsored jihad is no longer a foreign policy instrument, but a domestic threat tearing at its borders.
In Pakistan's southwestern Balochistan province, the town of Zehri in Kuzdar district has been transformed into a war zone, where Pakistan's military siege, aerial bombardment and collective punishment have pushed thousands of civilians to the brink of starvation. For over a month, children have been killed in drone strikes, villages have been burnt, and an entire population has been cut off, without food, medicine or communication. Now, in response, the Baloch diaspora is rising across Europe, demanding international intervention and calling out Pakistan for what they describe as a systematic genocide. We have a report.
The Baloch National Movement held a massive demonstration outside the UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in London, protesting Pakistan's siege of Zehri. BNM leaders accused the Pakistani military of killing 4 children and 2 adults in a recent drone strike, burning crops ready for harvest, torching homes and imposing a complete lockdown over Zehri and adjoining villages including Nichara, Pandran, Kombi and Bulbul. Internet lines are cut. No one can enter, no one can leave. A humanitarian emergency is unfolding, but Islamabad continues to deny access to journalists and aid groups.
A systematic genocide is going on. Today, District Zehri is under a siege and no one knows how many people have been abducted and how many people have been killed. Just for news, the news has come, only 6 dead bodies of children have been surfaced. Rest we don't know what is going on. So it is a crucial time for the rest of the world that open your eyes. Whatever crimes are being done in Balochistan, you would be considered partner with Pakistan if you continue supporting Pakistan with the military aid against Baloch people. And along with that, I would clearly say to the international organizations and the media houses, you raise the voice of Sudan, you raise the voice of Ukraine, Palestine, so that is good. But when it comes to the voice of Balochistan, for the people of Balochistan, you get silent over there.
BNM leaders including Fahim Baloch, Manzoor Baloch and Niaz Baloch called Pakistan's actions state crimes and demanded that the UK, EU and UN send fact-finding missions. Protesters also appealed for an immediate suspension of British financial and military assistance to Pakistan, arguing that Western support is directly enabling the killing of Baloch civilians. Awareness marches were also held at Trafalgar Square and Parliament Square, where BNM activists, including young children, distributed pamphlets and addressed passers-by, urging the world to stop treating Balochistan as a forgotten conflict. The crisis in Zehri intensified after August 2025 when fighters of the Baloch Raji Ajoy Sangar brass gained control over parts of the region. Pakistan responded with a massive land and air offensive using tanks, helicopter gunships and drones. Since October, clashes have escalated further. Military curfews, house raids, enforced disappearances, information blackouts and indiscriminate bombing have left civilians trapped. Human rights groups say Pakistan is using collective punishment, a war crime under international humanitarian law.
Thousands of Baloch civilians have been tortured, harassed, hundreds of civilians have been forcibly disappeared, dozens of Baloch civilians have been killed. 2 days ago, in a drone strike, 4 children one woman and adult man was mercilessly killed in a drone strike. After that, Zaire is still under military siege, and the people of Zaire are starving. There is no food, there is no medicine. Because of medicine shortage, the wounded persons, they don't get proper treatment. So the purpose of today's protest is to call British government to press Pakistan.
The demonstrations in London follow similar BNM protests in Germany, where activists denounced the Punjabi-dominated army's brutality and urged the UN, EU and rights groups to intervene. BNM warned that continued silence by the West makes them complicit in Pakistan's crimes, especially when Western weapons and aid are used against Baloch civilians. As the siege of Zaire enters its second month, Islamabad continues to hide behind internet shutdowns and military secrecy. But the Baloch diaspora is making it clear, the days of quiet genocide are over.
Pakistan's continued control over parts of Jammu and Kashmir remains a serious human rights concern and an unresolved chapter in South Asia's history. Marking October 22nd as Black Day, the United Kashmir People's National Party has once again reminded the world of the 1947 invasion that laid the foundation for decades of political regression, demographic manipulation and violence in the region. UKPNP has condemned the killing of peaceful protesters and the demographic changes in POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan, urging the international community to hold Islamabad accountable and end its repressive policies. We have a report. It was 22nd October 1947 that Pakistan launched its first act of aggression against the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, a tribal invasion codenamed Operation Gulmarg, carried out by Pakistan's military. Villages were burnt, women were assaulted, and thousands of innocent civilians were killed in cold blood. More than 7 decades later, the people of Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir continue to live under an imposed regime marked by fear, censorship, and denial of basic freedoms. Each year, the United Kashmir People's National Party commemorates this day as Black Day, calling it the darkest day in their history, a reminder of how Pakistan's military occupation began and how it continues to subjugate the region. This year too, in Brussels, UKPNP organized a protest right in front of the European Parliament. The activists condemned Pakistan's ongoing human rights abuses, including the recent killings of peaceful protesters in Muzaffarabad and other parts of POJK, accusing Islamabad of ruling through bullets, not ballots.
इस ऑपरेशन गुलमर्ग के नतीजे में जो है वो हमारे लोगों को मारा गया, जो है वो हमारे जो है वो बच्चे जो है वो यतीम हो गए, हमारी जो है वो औरतों की अस्मत दरी हुई। हम ये चाहते हैं एक फैक्ट फाइंडिंग मिशन जो है वो आज़ाद कश्मीर और गिलगित-बल्तिस्तान और होल जम्मू कश्मीर में भेजा जाए, ताकि जितनी भी ह्यूमन राइट्स वायोलेशन है उनको जो है वो रिकॉर्ड में लाया जाए और उनके ऊपर जो है वो सेक्शन मेजर्स लिए जाएं।
The UKPNP has accused Pakistan's security forces of operating with complete impunity, often resorting to torture, disappearances, and intimidation to silence dissenting voices. Protesters have been met with bullets instead of dialogue, most recently during the September 29 protests when Pakistan's law enforcement agencies opened fire on unarmed civilians.
On 29th of September, a massive protest was dealt with the iron fist of the government of Pakistan, and about 12 innocent people, including some members of the armed forces, law enforcement agencies and local police, were killed. That is a very unfortunate situation. And after that, the government of Pakistan established a delegation to talk with Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee. We believe that such killing of innocent people could have been avoided if Pakistan would have nominated that delegation before 29th of September. We condemn those killings and we demand government of Pakistan to provide compensation to the victims of those families whose loved ones were become the target of Pakistani law enforcement agencies' bullets.
Activists allege that Pakistan's heavy-handedness is part of a broader design, a systematic attempt to alter the demographic identity of the region. The UKPNP calls this demographic engineering a deliberate strategy to erase the region's ethnic, cultural and linguistic identity and tightens Pakistan's colonial grip.
22nd of October 1947, the Pakistani attack on Jammu Kashmir, the darkest day in history of states. United Kashmir People National Party, the UKPNP, observes 22nd of October every year as the darkest day in the history of the state of Jammu Kashmir.
Beyond human rights violations, the situation in POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan have become a humanitarian crisis marked by economic deprivation, crumbling infrastructure, and the looting of natural resources by Pakistani and Chinese corporations under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The local population, meanwhile, sees none of the benefits, only military checkpoints, environmental destruction, and unemployment. Civil rights activists warn that Pakistan's extractive policies are turning these occupied territories into resource colonies, violating every tenet of international law. At the Brussels protest, UKPNP leaders called upon the United Nations and the European Union to intervene, demanding a fact-finding mission to document abuses in POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan. They stressed that Pakistan's ongoing occupation and its denial of self-determination to the people of the region is not just a local issue, but a serious threat to regional peace and stability. For decades, Pakistan has projected itself as a champion of Kashmiri rights at international forums, while crushing those very rights in the territories it controls. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We'll be back next week with more news, views and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Shivangi Mishra signing off on behalf of the entire team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.